Hi, in this video I'm going to be going over LSAT 33, Game 2, and we're going to specifically be looking at Rule 2, where we see the phrase J's, Martin's, or both. Okay, so we're going to talk about or as inclusive, all right, how we generally assume inclusivity, but if they make the inclusivity explicit, we kind of just ignore it because we've already been assuming inclusivity. Okay, so hopefully that'll make more sense when we actually get there. So I'm just going to go through the setup here. Bird watchers explore a forest to see which of the following 6 kinds of birds it contains. What are the 6 kinds? G, H, J, M, S, and W. Right, we don't know how many in, how many out. We're just trying to see which ones are in, which ones are out, without having like a minimum or maximum or anything. All right, so rule 1, if H, then not G, if G, then not H, would be the contrapositive. Rule 2, okay, so if J's, Martin's, or both. If J's or Martin's or both are in the forest, then so are harriers. Okay, J's, Martin's, or both. All right, so typically when we have the word or, we would actually assume that or both is included. So if this said, if J's or Martin's are in the forest, then so are harriers, we would actually assume it means the same thing as is written here, right? So there are 2 ways of interpreting or. We can interpret it as inclusive of both or exclusive of both. So inclusive is the movie theater example, and exclusive is the restaurant example. All right, so inclusive, why do I say movie theater? So for a movie that's rated R, you either have to be 18 or older or accompanied by an adult. Okay, so this or here is you're either an adult accompanied by an adult, or both maybe, right? So you could be an adult with an adult. That's not going to be a problem, right? They're not going to exclude you from the movie because you have both of these criteria. So having both is also acceptable, and that's assumed, right? They don't have to say that in the rules for you to understand that. We just understand it by context. So we're going to assume inclusive if we just see or. If they tell us it's inclusive, then we're just going to treat it the way we always treat or, and we would treat this the same way as if it said if J or M, then H. So J on its own or M on its own would be sufficient to get us to H. If we have both of them, cool, we're still getting to H. That's still going to be our consequence. And if we don't have H, then we know that we have neither of these guys, right? So J is out and M is out. Okay. If we talk about what the exclusive meaning of or would be in the real world context, I think of a restaurant menu where it says that your sandwich comes with salad or fries. They don't say on the restaurant menu that your sandwich doesn't come with both, right? That if you want another side with your sandwich, you're gonna have to pay extra, right? It's not included in the price of your sandwich. But because of context, in the real world, we know that that's meant to be exclusive and this one is meant to be inclusive. So the reason we even talk about the 2 meanings of or on the LSAT is because it's kind of ambiguous in the real world, and we actually just glean the meaning of or from the context. right? And so on the LSAT, because we're not supposed to bring in outside information, and because especially in games, the context isn't as important often, right? So like the subject matter isn't really what they're testing you on in any way. They're testing you on the specific meanings of words. We tend to just say, let's just assume that or is inclusive unless they tell us otherwise. Let's not assume that it doesn't include both. Let's assume it includes both unless they specifically tell us that it doesn't include both, or the other rules that were given very specifically would make it impossible for us to have both. And that's kind of the context of the game coming in, but they're going to be explicit in the game about those other rules that would maybe make it impossible for us to have both. So if there's another rule that would make it impossible for us to have both J and M, then that's never going to happen, and so it just kind of becomes irrelevant. Okay, but if you see J or M or both, I would just write that as J or M, because it's not going to actually make a difference to explicitly say or both, and it could potentially be confusing because you might start adding a whole bunch of extra stuff, right? So you might start adding, so you have J or M, or J and M, and then H, right? You've got all of this to deal with, and then in your contrapositive, you're saying if we don't have H, then we don't have J and we don't have M, and we don't have J or we don't have M. And you kind of start going like, well, what does that even mean, right? Well, okay, if we don't have H, we don't have J, and we don't have M, and we don't have J or we don't have M. You know, this part just doesn't matter anymore because we've already been told we don't have J and we don't have M. So we already know neither of them are in. This all just is kind of weird to add on, right? It doesn't really mean anything. So our little formulaic rules are based on this idea that on the LSAT, they are going to use the word or, and it's going to imply that both are possible. If it says not both, then we have something else to deal with, right? So if it says A or B, not both, that actually means if A is in, B is out. If B is out, A is in. If B is in, A is out. If A is out, B is in. So this is a biconditional. That's if they add not both, right? So that's a bit of an aside. If you'd like more information on that, let me know. I do have a video dealing with LSAT B, Prep Test B, Game 2, where we actually do have an or not both scenario. So if you're interested in that, you can check out that video. Prep Test B isn't available on Law Hub, but you can probably find a PDF copy of it. And if not, you know, email me. Yeah, so hopefully that helps clear up any issues with or. We have actually seen the LSAT writers bring in or both explicitly, like actually writing or both instead of just having or, and we have to understand implicitly that it's inclusive. So they have actually said that. Just, yeah, that's kind of a new thing that they've done now. Recognize that we already assume or both in our notation when we just use one or. That the notation is kind of adapted to an inclusive version of or anyways. So we can ignore it when they add or both. We don't want to ignore it when they say not both, because that's different from the way that our notation understands the word or. Okay. Cool. So that's just rule 2, which was the rule that I was asked a question about. So I'm actually just going to leave it there and move on to another video.